Welcome to Worldviews at Work. Today we'll be dealing with educational history in Greenland. 1721 marks the colonization of Greenland by the Danish Empire with the establishment of the settlement Good Hope. Well, it was actually a recolonization. Greenland was settled by Norse people during the Viking Ages from what is Norway and Denmark today. Several colonies were functioning for several hundred years during the Middle Ages, until the middle of the 15th century, by which they were gone. And we don't know exactly how or why they disappeared. The contact between the island of Greenland and the power claiming it has been cut multiple times throughout history. It points to Greenland's position as a region of the world that has always been in the periphery of awareness in a larger global order and history. Yet it's also clear that foreign forces have been trying to shape the development of the Greenlandic society for hundreds of years, especially since the Danish colonization. One aspect of Greenlandic society, which has been in constant change since the Danish colonization, is the field of education, the education of Greenlandic people. How since the start of Danish colonization, Greenlandic society has been appropriating the imposed colonial framework of education. As the goals and objectives of the powers present in Greenland have changed throughout the centuries, who was taught, what was taught, who was teaching, have been changing with it. For this reason, looking at the history of education in Greenland can serve as an excellent way of re-engaging the cycles of power between Greenlandic and Danish as languages. In this podcast, we will dive into the histories of Greenlandic people receiving education at different points in time since the onset of the Danish colonization. Who were the first people to receive education in Greenland? What kinds of historic forces were pushing them to get education? What kinds of trends did they start in Greenlandic society? And how can we understand the relationship between Greenland and Denmark in a wider global context? Malirak Webeck was among the first women to go to Denmark and get educated in the early 20s in the 20th century. It was the newly formed Committee for the Education of Young Greenlandic Ladies, which was created to supply the brightest women of Greenland with modern education, that gave her the stipend, allowing her to go. The theme of modernity will come up several times in this podcast. It is through the definition of modernity that the relationship between the colonized and the colonizer is seen. In the case of the Committee for the Education of Young Greenlandic Ladies, the vision of modernity was one of women adhering to Danish standards of what kind of behavior women were supposed to do, what kind of skills women were supposed to have, which starts to outline how the hegemonic relationship between the Danish and the Greenlandic culture was working. The recent book published by the Greenlandic Institute for Culture and Societal History describes the relationship between Greenlandic and Danish at the time. The Danish language offers a way to navigate one's career, while the Greenlandic language appears as a language of day-to-day conversation. The dichotomy between the Danish and Greenlandic cultures continues to be stark. Despite hundreds of years of close interaction, a new mixed culture hasn't emerged. Opportunities at the time usually depended on one's ability to speak Danish. The language served as a barrier between the two cultures and was a determinant of status and hierarchy in the Greenlandic society. Malirak grew up in a community of 120 at the southern tip of Greenland. She was the child of an auxiliary priest who at the time represented the biggest population of educated Greenlandic people on the island. Her great-grandfather was one of the first priests of Greenland who had received part of his education in Greenland. But how did Malirak end up being offered a Danish education? The first girls' school of Greenland was founded in the year Malirak finished primary school. As she had the right age, she was sent to attend after having passed an entry test. After 2 years of attendance, she graduated at the top of her class. The Committee of the Education of Young Greenlandic Ladies would come along and offer a Danish education. She went to Denmark. She got educated as a teacher. Usually, while she was in Denmark, she would find herself being the only Greenlandic person. For a Greenlandic person at the time, she had a very high level of education, a fully Danish education. The historical forces shaping the flow of Greenlandic people to Denmark was shaped by the hierarchy. There was a sense that the inferiority that Greenlandic people felt could be escaped by becoming more Danish. Lirak met her husband in Denmark, but before they had time to marry, Second World War. It would be 6 years before Lirak and her husband would be reunited. There was no passageway between Denmark and Greenland in those years. While Second World War was going on, Greenland would be like an autonomous country. After the war, Greenland's relationship to Denmark changed as the island was incorporated as a region in the Kingdom of Denmark. The third report of the Commission of Greenland of 1950, with a focus on the school system, the church, and cultural affairs, on the insufficiency of Greenlandic as a language of education. In this matter, particular attention must be brought to the fact that modern literature, that of common and cultural enlightenment as well as of the technical kind, due to limited readership, cannot be translated and published in Greenlandic. Therefore, it is of crucial necessity for the Greenlandic people's acquisition of modern culture that their ability to read is given to allow access to normal horizon-widening literature of the present's great pool of knowledge in technical and academic areas. Based on these thoughts, the post-war period brought rapid change to Greenlandic education. It was years of offensive developmental policies. The vision of modernity was very clear in this report. Modernity is associated with knowledge of European descent, or knowledge created through application of the scientific method. The Danish language would be the key giving access to the pool of modern knowledge, and should therefore be taught in schools. At the time, the vision of the Greenland elite was to achieve equality with the Danish mainland. This meant supporting these kind of policies. During these years, Danish was the prime role of education. Danish teachers were sent to Greenland. Hundreds of Greenlandic children were sent to Danish boarding schools to learn Danish. In 1972, almost half of a given class of Greenlandic children were in Denmark. The intense focus on learning Danish had a range of negative consequences. Greenlandic people were met with strong negative stereotypes in Denmark. Many came to Denmark without knowing how to read and write Greenlandic. It contributed to a rupture of identities, in which children would leave their homes before being grounded in their own culture. In some ways, it seems that the practice of sending Greenlandic children to be civilized and learn what it means to be part of a modern culture in Denmark, the thought that the Greenlandic culture would be unable to exist if it wasn't modernized, has quite a lot of similarities to the ideas of white man's burden. How the British shipped Aboriginal children in Australia, took them away from their parents in order to give them education. Though the practices in Greenland didn't include forcefully sending children to Denmark, the reasoning and mindset behind making this available to Greenlandic families was grounded in some of the same ideas of the primitive culture's ability to survive in a developed world. During the 70s, a Greenlandic counter-hegemonic culture arose in response to this development. In particular, as students who had been sent to Denmark spoke up about their experiences. This movement has maintained its influence since then. Education became more centered on teaching Greenlandic first, and then engaging with Danish or English as second languages. In 1984, Greenland established its own university, though most classes are taught in Danish or English. Most recently, Greenland voted to become an autonomous country in the official language of the country. Being the official language, Greenlandic got official recognition of its rightful place in a range of different domains. With that recognition, it became the official language of education. However, this is not the whole story. We can go further back. In 1845, the first seminars for educating auxiliary priests was established in Greenland. The first Greenlandic man who finished his education as an auxiliary priest was called Rasmus Bertelsen. He got a quite unique education as compared to his equals. From a very young age, he was taught by the priest of one of the larger towns in Greenland. This priest soon arranged for him to go to Denmark to receive education. Bertelsen went to Denmark, though it turned out that the National Board of Greenland denied to pay for his education. So, after living in Copenhagen for 3 years, he decided to go back to Greenland. Despite his failure at getting a Danish education, when he returned to Nuuk, the biggest city of Greenland, in 1847, the leaders of the seminar immediately saw his promise and gave him the test. He passed the test, and he became the first auxiliary priest to get his degree in Greenland. Now, one can ask themselves, why auxiliary priests? Why not a technical degree, normal teachers? Why was auxiliary priests the first education to be established in Greenland? It turns out that Christian missionaries played a very big role in shaping the Greenlandic education system from the start of the colonization, especially the idea of the schooling mission. The school mission connects very closely to the Protestant ideas of Martin Luther. People, according to this line of thinking, should and could not be converted to Christianity without having access to and knowledge of the faith in their own language. It would not be good enough to tell them about the words of God using Danish. So how does this relate to the education of Greenlandic people in the seminars? One of the first roles of the missionaries when they initially arrived in Greenland was to create a written language. A language suitable for spreading the word of God. Having developed the written language, the church started spreading not just the word of God, but also knowledge of how to read and write Greenlandic. Greenlandic people who wanted to study to become auxiliary priests had to know how to write and read Greenlandic, as well as Danish. Rasmus Bertelsen became part of a new social group of Greenlandic society. With the creation of the education for auxiliary priests, an educated class arose in Greenland. This class would contribute to the development of Greenlandic as a written language, but also as a language for the assembly of civil society. Bertelsen would become one of the founding members of the first newspaper printed in Greenlandic in 1861, which is still printed today. When compared to other indigenous societies whose languages have gone extinct or lost domains to more universal ones, it almost seemed as if the coming of Christianity was a positive intervention. It created a base for the development of a Greenlandic public society in ways that many indigenous societies throughout the world never have had. It is the only Inuit language which is expanding currently. This puts into question how one should frame the colonial and imperial process. The question of the role religion played in the establishment of a Greenlandic literary tradition alludes to the high complexity of the colonial condition and the colonial educational venture. Often forces that seem to harm or destroy indigenous societies also provide the resources for their reinvention. It's difficult to go further back into the history of education as sources start to dry up. It becomes tales of individuals rather than institutions. Hans Zacchaeus is an early story of a Greenlander who in 1816 hid in an English transport ship after having been converted to Christianity. Having convinced the ship's crew to take him back to England, he ended up getting education there. He later joined the expeditions of the English explorer John Ross. The earliest record of someone attending Danish university from Greenland comes from the archives of Copenhagen. A person of the name Casper Alsberg was registered under the region of Greenland in 1775. Though registered as being from Greenland, Alsberg seems to be the son of a Danish merchant that settled in Greenland. So it's difficult to know who really was the first student in the Danish educational venture.